Some memories don't just live in your head, they live in your bones. For me, my sister Ashley's wedding is one of those. It's a memory that has a physical weight to it, a scent, a sound. 2 years ago, it was the social event of our family's entire existence. My parents, David and Carol Sterling, saw it as the culmination of their life's work. Not their successful real estate business in Greenwich, Connecticut, but their project of raising a perfect daughter. I can still feel the chill of the Plaza Hotel's grand ballroom in New York City, a cold that had nothing to do with the air conditioning and everything to do with the sheer scale of the opulence. Thousands of white peonies, flown in from Holland, spilled from every surface, their scent so thick it was almost suffocating. My mother glided through the room, her smile as tight and perfect as her pearl necklace, pointing out who was who to my father. "David, look, the Vanderbilt's grandson is over by the ice sculpture. Go say hello." And Ashley? Ashley was breathtaking. She floated in a custom Marquesa gown that cost more than my entire college education. The silk and lace whispered against the marble floors as she moved, a literal angel of old money aesthetics. She was marrying Michael, a junior partner at some prestigious Wall Street firm whose last name sounded like a luxury car brand. He was handsome in that generically sharp way, with a good jawline and an even better portfolio. "See, Chloe?" my mother had whispered to me, her fingers digging into my arm as we watched the first dance. Her eyes were gleaming. This is what it's all about, a good match, stability, respect. We spent over $250,000 to make sure she had the perfect start. A foundation you can build a life on. I just nodded, smoothing down the simple navy dress I'd bought myself. In a sea of couture, I felt like a lifeboat. My parents hadn't seen my choice of dress as a sign of my modest taste, but as another symptom of my lack of ambition. I was the other daughter, the A-word, the artist, the one who had traded the promise of a corner office in Manhattan for a sun-drenched, slightly too small apartment in Austin, Texas. 2 years later, that apartment was my sanctuary. I had built a life for myself as a graphic designer, one that was mine, 1,000 miles away from the crushing pressure of Greenwich. My days were filled with color palettes and client briefs, the smell of fresh coffee and the warm Texas sun on my face. It wasn't the plaza, but it was real. My parents, of course, saw it differently. Our weekly phone calls were a masterclass in passive aggression. "How is your little art project going, honey?" my mom would ask, her term for my growing freelance business. "It's going well, Mom. I just landed a national campaign for a new coffee brand." "Oh, that's nice." Ashley's Michael just made another bonus. They're looking at a second home in the Hamptons, for the weekends. Every conversation was a comparison, a subtle reminder that I had chosen the wrong path. I was the family's strange, bohemian experiment, a daughter who traded a sterling reputation for artistic fulfillment. They loved me, I suppose, in their own way, but they fundamentally didn't approve of me. My life, predictable and creatively fulfilling, was upended on a Tuesday afternoon. I was deep in focus, finalizing a logo design, when I heard a strange groaning sound from inside the walls of my trendy but aging apartment building. It was followed by a drip, then a pop, and then a sound I can only describe as a fire hose turning on inside my living room wall. A dark, menacing bloom of water spread across the antique plaster. Within seconds, a torrent of brownish water was gushing from a crack near the floorboards, flooding my vintage Moroccan rug and inching toward the legs of my wooden desk where all my equipment was. I yelped, a jolt of pure panic shooting through me as I unplugged everything and frantically started piling books and cushions to build a makeshift dam. I called my landlord in a frenzy, my voice 2 octaves higher than normal. "It's a waterfall, Jerry. There's a literal waterfall in my apartment." He was surprisingly calm. Okay, deep breaths. "I'm sending my best guy over. He's the only one I trust with the old piping in that building. He'll be there in 20 minutes. 20 minutes later, there was a firm, steady knock on my door. I pulled it open, still flustered, my hair a mess, expecting an older guy with a tool belt slung low on his hips. Instead, I saw him. He was maybe a few years older than me, dressed in simple, worn-in work clothes, a gray Henley that fit him well, and jeans dusted with what looked like plaster. He wasn't conventionally handsome in the slick, polished way Michael was. His features were stronger, kinder, but it was his eyes that stopped me. They were a clear, intelligent blue, and they held an incredible sense of calm. He took in the chaos of my flooded apartment, then looked at my panicked face, and a small, charming smile touched his lips. "Looks like you've got a bit of a situation here," he said, his voice a low, steady baritone that instantly cut through my anxiety. "A situation?" I gestured wildly. "This is a disaster. My rug is ruined. My floor is probably going to collapse and plunge me into the apartment below." He chuckled, a warm, genuine sound. "I don't think it'll come to that. Let's get the water shut off first, and then we'll get your life back on dry land." As he worked, moving with a quiet confidence and efficiency that was mesmerizing, I found myself just watching him. He explained what had happened. A main supply line had burst due to age, in a way that was simple but not condescending. While waiting for some of the pressure to release, he noticed the prints of my design work hanging on the wall, the only things I'd managed to save from the splash zone. "This is your stuff?" he asked, pointing to a vibrant, abstract piece. I nodded. "Yeah, I'm a graphic designer." He stepped closer, studying it. "The color theory is really strong. The balance is great. It's got a lot of energy." I was floored. Most people just said, "Oh, that's pretty." He actually saw it. We ended up talking for an hour while he worked, about art, about the weird charm of old buildings, about the best breakfast taco spots in Austin. His name was Nate. By the time he left, the water was off, the leak was contained, and my apartment was a damp, chaotic mess, but my stomach was full of butterflies. The disaster suddenly felt like the best thing that had ever happened to me. A few weeks later, Nate and I were inseparable. My initial attraction had deepened into something real and profound. And, inevitably, it was time for my weekly phone call with my parents. "So, anything new with you?" my mother asked. The prelude to her usual litany about Ashley's perfect life. I took a deep breath. "Actually, yes. I've started seeing someone." A beat of silence. Then, the interrogation began. "Oh," my mother said, her tone suddenly alert. "Who is he? What does he do? Is his family from Austin?" I hesitated. How could I possibly explain Nate to them? How could I describe the man who could fix a catastrophic plumbing failure with his bare hands in the morning, and then, that same evening, discuss the socio-economic impacts of modern architecture with startling intelligence? I knew any attempt to package him for their approval would fail. Any job title I gave them would be run through their brutal calculus of status and earning potential. So I tried to be vague, to give them a truth they couldn't immediately weaponize. "He works with his hands," I said carefully. "He's involved in property development and maintenance." I heard my mother let out a small, sharp scoff on the other end of the line. It was a sound I knew well, a tiny puff of air that carried a decade's worth of disappointment. "Oh, I see," she said, her voice dripping with a carefully constructed casualness that was more insulting than outright scorn. "So, a handyman, a glorified plumber." The words hung in the air between us, ugly and dismissive. I felt a flash of hot anger. I wanted to defend him, to tell her how smart and kind and capable he was, how he was more of a man than Ashley's polished husband could ever hope to be. But I also felt a strange, defiant impulse. They had already passed judgment. They had put Nate in a box without even knowing his name. Fine, I thought, a bitter resolve hardening inside me. Let them. Let them think what they want. "Something like that," I said, my voice flat. And I let the plumber narrative be born from their own snobbery. The first few months with Nate felt like living in a different reality, one painted in the vibrant, sun-drenched colors of Austin instead of the muted, old-money grays of Greenwich. Our dates weren't the calculated, network-building ordeals I grew up with. They were spontaneous and real. One Friday, he picked me up in his dusty but reliable Ford F-150, the cab smelling faintly of sawdust and coffee, and drove us to a hole-in-the-wall joint on the outskirts of town. It was a blues bar, the kind with sticky floors, mismatched chairs, and a stage barely big enough for the three-piece band playing their hearts out. My sister Ashley would have walked in and right back out again, wrinkling her nose. But I loved it. I loved watching Nate, who seemed to know the owner, joke with the bartender and tap his hand on the table in perfect time with the music. He was completely at ease in a world built on soul, not status. Then, a week later, he surprised me entirely. "Put on that dress you like," he said over the phone, his voice warm. "The green one. We've got a thing tonight." The thing turned out to be a massive charity gala for urban renewal at a sleek downtown hotel. I felt a flicker of my old Greenwich insecurity as we walked in, but Nate navigated the sea of tuxedos and evening gowns with an unnerving confidence. He wasn't just there, he belonged. I watched, mesmerized, as he fell into a deep conversation with a city councilman and a well-known architect, discussing zoning laws and sustainable building materials with a startling level of expertise. When I raised an eyebrow at him later, he just shrugged with that easy smile. "I do some consulting work on the side," he explained. "I'm here tonight with a family friends company. They're a big sponsor." It sounded plausible enough, and honestly, I was too smitten to dissect it. The inconsistencies were there, like tiny cracks in a perfect facade, but I was too in love to care. There was his truck, a workhorse if I ever saw one, yet on his wrist he wore a vintage Rolex. When I noticed it one evening as it caught the light, he simply said it was my grandfather's. A family heirloom. It looked right on him, understated and classic, not flashy. It fit the man who could talk about plumbing schematics one minute and Renaissance art the next. Then came the bombshell he dropped one Tuesday over tacos. "I have to head out of town for about a week. A quick trip to Dubai for a project assessment." Dubai? I nearly choked on my carnitas. Like, Dubai? "The one and only," he said casually, as if he were talking about a trip to Dallas. "It's a complicated build. They need a specialist to look at the water reclamation systems." A plumber going to Dubai for a project assessment. My mind tried to put the pieces together, but they wouldn't fit. Yet, when he looked at me, his eyes so sincere, and told me he'd call me every night, my doubts melted away. I was in love with his personality, his kindness, the way he made me feel seen for who I was, not who my family wanted me to be. The rest was just noise. The real noise, however, was coming from 1,700 miles away in Connecticut. My weekly calls with my mother, Carol, began to feel like interrogations. "So this Nate," she'd begin, her voice thin and tight over the phone. "What is it his family does again?" "I don't know all the details, Mom. His dad is retired, I think. They're just a nice family." "Chloe, details matter," she'd sigh, a sound I knew was meant to convey her profound disappointment in my life choices. Is he building a future? Does he have ambition? Or is he content to be a handyman in Austin for the rest of his life? I loved Nate more each day, so after 6 months, when he got down on one knee in the middle of Zilker Park with the Austin skyline glittering behind him and asked me to be his wife, there was only one answer. I screamed yes before he could even finish the question. I called my parents that night, my heart pounding with a mixture of pure joy and stomach-churning dread. My father, David, answered. I blurted it out. "Dad, I have amazing news. Nate asked me to marry him, and I said yes." Silence. Not the happy, stunned silence I'd hoped for, but a dead, cold void on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing. Then my mother's voice came on the extension. "Chloe, are you serious?" Her voice was sharp, brittle. "Of course I'm serious. I'm so happy," I said, my own happiness already starting to curdle. "Happy?" she scoffed. The word was an insult. "Chloe, we spent over $250,000 to ensure Ashley had the perfect start in life. A wedding at the plaza, a dress featured in a magazine, a husband who reflects her station. You want to throw your life away on a plumber from Austin? Think of the humiliation. What will we tell people? That our daughter is marrying the help?" The word plumber hung in the air, a weapon they had sharpened just for me. The cruelty of it stole my breath. "He's not the help, Mom. He's the man I love," I whispered, my throat tight. "Love doesn't pay for a mortgage in Greenwich, Chloe," my father finally said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Don't expect any help from us. We gave Ashley a blank check. You won't get a dime. We will not fund this embarrassment." The call ended with them telling me to reconsider my choices before it was too late. I hung up, the phone sliding from my sweaty palm. The tears came then, hot and angry. When Nate found me, he just wrapped his strong arms around me and let me cry. "We don't need them, Chloe," he said softly, wiping a tear from my cheek. "We don't need their money or their approval. We'll do it our way." And that's exactly what we did. We decided on a small, beautiful ceremony in the Texas Hill Country, under a sprawling oak tree at a rustic vineyard. We'd pay for it ourselves. Every vendor we hired, every choice we made, from the local wildflower bouquets to the string quartet playing indie folk songs, was a declaration of our independence. It was our wedding, built on love, not obligation. My parents' fury was a distant storm I was finally learning to fly away from. They made their final position clear in a curt email a month before the wedding. They would not be attending. The humiliation, they wrote, was simply too much to bear. It hurt, a deep, primal ache for the parents I wished I had. But as I stood with Nate planning a day that was authentically us, I felt a new strength take root. I was choosing him. I was choosing me. The Texas Hill Country in May is something straight out of a postcard. The air, thick with the scent of cedar and sun-baked earth, was a world away from the manicured lawns and saltwater tang of Greenwich. Our wedding wasn't at the plaza. It was set under the sprawling branches of a century-old oak tree, its leaves filtering the golden afternoon light. There was no custom Marchesa gown. I wore a simple, elegant lace dress that cost less than the appetizers at my sister Ashley's engagement party. There were no ice sculptures or string orchestras playing Vivaldi. Instead, a talented local string quartet played acoustic versions of our favorite indie rock songs. It was everything I had ever wanted, intimate, real, and so full of love it felt like a physical presence. Nate's family, who had all flown in from various corners of the country and even overseas, were a revelation. They weren't the gruff, uncultured people my mother had pictured. They were doctors, architects, artists, all warm, impeccably dressed, and possessing a quiet confidence that had nothing to do with brand names or zip codes. Nate's mother hugged me so tightly I thought my ribs might crack, her eyes sparkling with genuine happy tears. "Welcome to the family, Chloe," she'd whispered. "We are so lucky to have you." As I stood there, waiting for the ceremony to begin, my best friend Sarah fussing with my veil, I did it. I scanned the 50 or so chairs we'd set up on the lawn. I looked for the two faces I knew, deep down, wouldn't be there. The empty space where my parents should have been was a tangible void. A part of me, the little girl who just wanted her mommy and daddy to be proud, felt a sharp, tiny sting of grief. But then I looked down the aisle, past the smiling faces of our friends, and saw Nate. He was standing there, looking impossibly handsome in a tailored navy suit. That easy, familiar smile on his face. His eyes met mine, and in that single look, all the hurt, all the anger towards my parents, just dissolved. It didn't matter. They had chosen their pride over their daughter, and I had chosen this incredible man. I was resolute. I was happy. This was my family now. The ceremony was a beautiful blur of heartfelt vows we'd written ourselves, punctuated by laughter and happy sniffles from our guests. When Nate slid the simple gold band onto my finger, his hand warm and steady in mine, I felt a sense of peace settle over me that was more profound than any social or financial approval. Later, as the sun began to dip below the rolling hills, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and pink, we were all celebrating. Fairy lights twinkled in the trees, and the air was filled with chatter and laughter. Nate had his arm wrapped around my waist, and we were posing for a photo with his cousins who'd flown in from London. I felt a buzz in the small clutch I was carrying. Pulling out my phone, I saw a notification from our family group chat. My heart gave a stupid little lurch of hope. Maybe they'd changed their minds. Maybe it was a picture of a card, a simple congratulations. But it wasn't. It was a single text from my mother. I hope you're happy. Don't come calling us when the reality of being married to a blue-collar worker sets in. I read it once, then twice. The cruelty of it, the timing of it, was breathtaking. It was designed to wound, to plant a seed of doubt and regret on the happiest day of my life. For a second, the Texas air felt cold. I could feel the familiar sting behind my eyes, the old hurt rising up. And then something shifted inside me. It was like a switch being flipped. The hurt was still there, a faint echo in the background, but it was drowned out by a wave of something else entirely. It was the absurdity, the sheer, ridiculous snobbery of it all. Here I was, surrounded by more genuine love and happiness than I'd ever witnessed at Ashley's $250,000 spectacle, and my mother was texting me warnings about marrying a blue-collar worker. The "go marry your plumber" insult, which had once felt like a brand of shame, now seemed utterly pathetic. I didn't get angry. I didn't cry. I laughed. It started as a small chuckle, and then it grew into a full, unabashed laugh. Nate looked at me, his brow furrowed in concern. "Everything okay, honey?" I held up the phone, showing him the text. He read it, and his expression hardened for a moment before melting into a soft, slightly sad smile. He shook his head and pulled me closer. "I'm so sorry, Chloe." "Don't be," I said, my voice clear and steady. The empowerment was a heady rush. She just gave me the best wedding gift I could have asked for. I scrolled through the first few shots our photographer had just sent over. I found the one. It was perfect. A stunning, sun-drenched candid of Nate and me, right after the ceremony. He's looking at me with so much love it's almost tangible, and I'm beaming, my face alight with pure, unadulterated joy. We looked like the two luckiest people in the world. Without a second thought, I sent the photo to the family group chat. I let the image speak for itself, adding only a simple, devastatingly calm caption. "Couldn't be happier. Introducing my husband, Nathaniel Hayes." I put the phone back in my clutch. Maybe a minute passed, maybe two. The band started playing a slow song, and Nate pulled me onto the makeshift dance floor. And then my phone began to vibrate against my hip, a frantic, insistent buzzing that wouldn't stop. It wasn't a text, it was a call. From my mother. I excused myself from Nate and walked a few feet away, toward the quiet of the darkening hills. I took a deep breath and answered, putting the phone on speaker. Silence. Then her voice came through, but it was a voice I had never heard before. It wasn't angry or condescending. It was a choked, panicked, barely audible whisper. "Chloe Hayes? Your caption, is your husband Nathaniel Hayes?" I stayed quiet, letting her squirm. "Chloe, answer me." The panic was escalating. "Son of the Jonathan Hayes? From Hayes Global Consolidated?" A cold, dawning realization hit me. I suddenly remembered all those stressed and phone calls from my father over the past year, ranting about some massive construction contract he was desperately trying to land, some impenetrable corporate fortress he couldn't get a foot into. The name of that company had been, without a doubt, Hayes Global Consolidated. The world around me was a warm, golden blur of fairy lights and smiling faces. The scent of Texas bluebonnets hung in the evening air, mixing with the delicious aroma of barbecue from the catering truck. Nate's hand was a steady, warm presence on the small of my back, his thumb rubbing gentle circles. For the first time in my life, I felt completely, utterly at peace. And then my phone, sitting on the rustic wooden table beside our half-eaten slices of wedding cake, started to vibrate violently. The screen lit up with a picture of my mother. I had been expecting a text, maybe another jab, another passive-aggressive comment. I wasn't expecting a call. Nate glanced at the screen, then back at me, his brow furrowed with concern. "You don't have to answer that, Chloe." "I know," I whispered, but something in me, a newfound core of steel, wanted to. I picked it up. The silence on the other end lasted only a second before my mother's voice, strangled and barely recognizable, clawed its way through the speaker. "Chloe, Hayes? Is that a joke? What is the meaning of that picture?" I kept my voice light, almost conversational. "It's not a joke, Mom. It's a wedding photo. I told you I was getting married today." "But, Hayes? Is your husband Nathaniel Hayes?" The name came out like a gasp, like she'd just been punched in the gut. Behind her, I could hear muffled, panicked sounds. My father, probably. "Yes, that's his name," I said calmly, taking a bite of my cake. It was vanilla bean with a lemon curd filling, exactly what Nate and I had wanted. Simple. Perfect. Nathaniel Hayes, son of the Jonathan Hayes from Hayes Global Consolidated? Her voice cracked, scaling up into a register of pure, unadulterated panic. The name hung in the air between us, a multi-billion-dollar ghost. Hayes Global. The construction and development empire my father had been practically salivating over for the past year, desperately trying to get a foot in the door, trying to land a contract that would supposedly secure his company for the next decade. He'd talked about it endlessly, complaining about how impenetrable the company was, how old school and selective. "He's Jonathan's son, yes," I confirmed, my voice betraying none of the swirling emotions inside me. There was a frantic shuffling sound, and suddenly my father's voice, thick with desperation, was on the line. The condescending, dismissive tone he usually reserved for me was gone, replaced by a high-strung, pleading whine. Chloe, listen to me. This is a very delicate situation." "What have you told him? About us? About my business?" I glanced over at Nate, who was watching me with a soft, knowing smile. He had already heard their side of the story from me night after night. He knew every cut, every slight, every dismissive remark. He held my free hand, his grip reassuring. "What do you mean, Dad?" I asked, feigning ignorance. "What would I have told him?" "Don't play games, Chloe," he snapped, the panic making him sound shrill. "Does he know who I am? Does he know that I've been trying to partner with his father's firm? My God, did you tell him that we didn't approve?" The opportunism was so thick I could practically smell it through the phone, a sour odor that completely overpowered the sweet scent of the bluebonnets. He wasn't horrified that he had insulted his son-in-law. He was terrified that he had blown the business deal of a lifetime. And that's when I decided to let the other shoe drop. "Oh, he knows everything, Dad," I said, and the calm clarity in my voice seemed to suck all the air out of the line. "He knows that you and Mom spent $250,000 on Ashley's wedding so she could marry into the right family. He knows you refused to give me a single dime. He knows you didn't even have the decency to show up today to see your own daughter get married." I paused, letting the words sink in. I could hear my mother start to make a little sobbing sound in the background. "And," I continued, unable to keep a small, triumphant smile from my lips, "he especially knows about your text, the one about me going off to marry my plumber." A choked noise came from my father's end. "Chloe, you must understand. No, you must understand," I cut in, my voice still perfectly level. Nate found that part particularly amusing. "You see, what you don't know, what you never bothered to ask, is that the Hayes family fortune wasn't just handed down. Nate's great-grandfather was a plumber. So was his grandfather. They started this entire empire with a single work truck and a box of wrenches 3 generations ago, right here in Texas. Nate still gets his hands dirty. He spends half his time on job sites. He believes in the value of the work. He thinks your snobbery is pathetic. But he thought it was a testament to my character that I fell in love with him when I thought he was just a guy fixing a burst pipe. The silence on the other end was absolute. It was the sound of 2 status-obsessed people realizing they had not only misjudged, but had spectacularly, catastrophically humiliated themselves in front of the very people they were desperate to impress. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted, it had been completely annihilated and rebuilt from the ground up, with me at the very top. Finally, my mother snatched the phone back, her voice a syrupy fake gush of affection. "Chloe, sweetie, we just didn't understand. We had no idea. This is wonderful news. We need to celebrate properly. A real family celebration. We can fly down to Austin, or we could host you both in Greenwich," my father yelled in the background. "When you get back from your honeymoon. Where are you going for your honeymoon? We can help plan something. Meet you there, even." The desperation was almost sad, almost. I looked at Nate, at our friends laughing and dancing under the stars, at the beautiful, authentic life I had chosen. A life I was about to share with this incredible man. My old life, the one of judgment and expectations and conditional love, felt a million miles away. "We're leaving tonight, actually," I said, my voice cool and final. "I'll be in touch when I'm ready." And without waiting for another panicked plea or fake congratulations, I pressed the red button on the screen, ending the call. I set the phone down, face down, and let out a long, slow breath. The chaos was over. For now. Nate squeezed my hand. "You okay?" he asked softly. I looked into his eyes, a universe of kindness and support, and a real, genuine smile spread across my face. "I'm more than okay," I said. "I'm free." The weeks that followed our honeymoon felt like waking up from a long, hazy dream into a life that was crisper and more vibrant than anything I'd ever known. We moved into a house on the outskirts of Austin, nestled in the rolling hills that bled into the Texas hill country. It wasn't a mansion, but it was perfect. Nate had designed it himself over a year ago, a project of passion. It was a masterpiece of clean lines, warm woods, and massive windows that invited the sprawling landscape inside. The air smelled of fresh-cut cedar and the faint, clean scent of drying paint. This was our sanctuary, a space built on love and intention, not on the need to impress anyone. I set up my graphic design studio in a room with a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking a grove of live oaks. For the first time, my work felt integrated into my life, not like a rebellious act against my family's expectations. Nate would often come in, quietly place a cup of tea on my desk, kiss the top of my head, and leave without a word, respecting my creative flow. We were building a partnership, a quiet, sturdy thing that felt more valuable than any stock portfolio. The constant, low-grade anxiety that had hummed beneath the surface of my life for years had finally gone silent. I was at peace. That peace was interrupted one Tuesday afternoon by a delivery truck rumbling up our long gravel driveway. I watched from my studio window as a man struggled to unload something truly monstrous. It was a floral arrangement so enormous and over the top, it looked like a float for a parade. A chaotic explosion of lilies, roses, and orchids, all fighting for space in a gaudy, gold-painted vase. It was the absolute antithesis of the simple, elegant wildflowers that filled our new home. It was, without a doubt, from my parents. Nate helped the delivery guy carry it into the foyer, where it immediately sucked all the air out of the room, its cloying, funereal scent overwhelming the fresh cedar. Tucked into the foliage was a thick, cream-colored envelope made of heavy cardstock. My name, Chloe Hayes, was written in my mother's perfect looping calligraphy. My new last name. Seeing it in her handwriting sent a complicated shiver down my spine. Nate watched me, his expression gentle. "You don't have to open that right now," he said softly. "No, it's okay," I sighed, pulling the card free. "Better to just get it over with." Inside, the card was filled with that same flawless script. It was a long, meandering letter about regrettable misunderstandings and the pressures of their world. It spoke of how they were so incredibly proud of the woman I'd become. There were no real apologies, just flowery justifications. Tucked inside the fold of the card was a check. I unfolded it numbly. The amount was staggering, $50,000. It was a sum that, a year ago, would have left me breathless. It was meant to be a grand gesture, a financial plaster for an emotional wound. But looking at it now, all I felt was a profound hollowness. It wasn't a gift, it was a transaction. A down payment on forgiveness. "What is it?" Nate asked, seeing the look on my face. I handed him the check and the letter. He read the letter first, his jaw tightening subtly. Then he glanced at the check and let out a low whistle. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine. "What do you want to do?" He didn't offer an opinion. He didn't tell me to tear it up or to cash it. He just put the power squarely in my hands, as he always did. I took the check from him and placed it, along with the letter, on the entryway table next to a set of his architectural blueprints. "I think," I said, my voice clearer than I expected, "I need to have a cup of coffee with my parents." I arranged to meet them 2 days later at a neutral coffee shop downtown, a place with lots of polished concrete and chatty baristas. I didn't want them in my home, not yet. I needed this confrontation to be on my terms, on my turf. I arrived a few minutes early and was already sipping an iced latte when they walked in. They looked smaller somehow. My father, usually so confident and imposing, had a strained look around his eyes. My mother's face was a carefully constructed mask of pleasantness, but her hands were fidgeting with the clasp of her designer handbag. "Chloe, darling," she began. Leaning in for a hug, I sidestepped by gesturing to the chair opposite me. "You look wonderful. Marriage agrees with you." "I'm happy," I said simply. My father cleared his throat. We got your message, that you wanted to talk." His usual booming voice was hesitant. "Did you get the flowers? And the little something we sent to help you get started?" I let the silence hang in the air for a moment before I reached into my purse and pulled out the cream-colored envelope. I slid it across the polished table. It stopped right in front of him. My mother's mask cracked. "Chloe? What's this?" "It's yours," I said, my voice calm and even. "I don't want it." "But it's a wedding gift," she protested, her voice rising slightly. "We wanted to contribute. We wanted to help." That's when the dam of my carefully constructed composure finally broke. Not with a flood of anger, but with a quiet, powerful current of truth. "No, you didn't," I said, looking from my mother's shocked face to my father's stunned one. "You wanted to buy your way back into my life. You spent $250,000 on Ashley's wedding because her husband looked good on paper. You refused to even show up to mine because you thought my husband didn't. You judged, you assumed, and you humiliated me. And when you found out that my plumber was actually the heir to Hayes Global, the one name you've been desperate to have in your contacts, you panicked. This check isn't a gift, it's an investment." I took a breath, letting my words sink in. My mother's eyes filled with tears, real ones this time. My father just stared at the check on the table as if it were a verdict. "My happiness was never for sale, and it isn't now," I continued, my voice softening just a little. "I married Nate because I love him. I love his heart, his mind, and the way he makes me feel, not his bank account. I would have been just as happy with him in a tiny apartment, fixing burst pipes for a living. If you want a relationship with me, with us, it will be because you love your daughter, not because you want access to my husband or his family. The choice is yours." I stood up, my chair making a soft scraping sound on the concrete floor. I didn't need to hear their response. I had said everything I needed to say. I turned and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving them there with their check and the consequences of their choices. That evening, our backyard was filled with the warm glow of string lights and the sound of laughter. A few of our close friends were over, the same ones who had stood with us at our wedding. Nate had his arm around me as we stood by the outdoor fireplace he'd just finished building. The air was cool, and the stars were beginning to pepper the vast Texas sky. My life was full, my heart was full, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a new text. It was from my mother. It didn't contain excuses or justifications, it was just 5 simple words. "We love you, we're sorry." A small, real smile touched my lips. I didn't reply, not yet. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, leaned my head on my husband's shoulder, and turned my face up to kiss him under the canopy of stars. I was free, and whatever came next, whatever reconciliation might be possible, it would happen on my own time, on my own terms.